It was October 2015 when my parents were finally able to realize the vacation they had been dreaming of for several years, without exaggerating. When my brothers and I were children, we had gotten used to having a few days of vacation every year, almost always on a beach in the country. But then dark seasons came for the family, with illnesses and financial problems, and soon these annual walks became just a memory. Almost 5 years later, we finally managed to have a long weekend vacation again. This time it wasn't a beach. On the contrary, given the heat that was hitting the city, we decided to look for a more contrasting and economical place, a place in the cold forest where we could wake up and smell the fog in the morning. My parents chose some cabins that some uncles had already recommended to us, and the truth is, I was excited because I was taking a photography class at the university and I felt that the forest would give me good opportunities to finish some rolls and bring something interesting to the next class. We arrived tired after that road trip, and I remember very well that, apart from the bath, when I arrived I needed to take a long shower because I felt very tired. However, we had to wait until the gentleman who owned the cabin arrived, half an hour after us, to show us the place and its surroundings. He explained some things to us and then pointed out a path that was a shortcut to the town, instead of taking such a long turn along the road we had just arrived on. "You can call me if you want," he said, "but there is very little signal here." "I get out and go to that tree," he told us, pointing, "because I feel there is a better signal." He left us alone and my brothers started running around outside with a ball, even though it was already getting dark. My parents raided the pantry. They had to start preparing dinner, and I took the opportunity to take that hot bath that I so needed. There wasn't a great view at the place, although we were very high up because the trees surrounded us. However, it looked just like the photos, and the fog was even beginning to surround the pine trees around the cabin. I went in to bathe and, for a moment, I heard as if someone had spoken to me. I turned off the shower and asked out loud, but they didn't answer me. I continued to bathe and heard something else, but I also tried to identify what it was. I decided not to pay attention to him. After all, we were in a forest and I wasn't very familiar with the sounds of nature. I finished bathing and continued listening. It was like an animal, something that scratched and moved behind the wall, running from the ceiling to the floor. I thought maybe it was a branch behind the bathroom, although I didn't see any trees that close to the cabin when we walked around the outside. Anyway, I was sure there was nothing to worry about, so much so that I didn't even mention it to my parents. However, that night I had a very ugly dream. I was the only one who had a room alone and I heard all night as if something was breathing very close to me. I think the fever hit me at some point and I had woken up several times feeling very bad. One of these times I woke up, I saw that my door was open and my mom was watching me. I asked her what was wrong and she told me that she just wanted to check that everything was okay. She came in to check my window and kissed me goodnight. "Here I come," she told me, "I'm not going to stay with you." In the morning, feeling a little better, they told me everything that had happened the night before while they were making coffee. My brothers heard that someone was walking on the wooden floor that surrounded the house. One of them had fallen asleep in the living room and woke up the other. "We have to calm down, it's probably nothing. Maybe there are deer around here or something like that, but calm down," he told her. Then he listened too and realized it was something on 2 legs, walking around us, something big. They ran out to wake up my dad without making a sound, and he looked for something to go out and check. It was at that moment when my mother came to my room. My father and my brothers came out armed with knives from the kitchen, a bat, and so they went out to check. Although they heard movement among the trees, they couldn't see anything. The darkness that night in the forest, without a moon and surrounded by tall trees, was total. I assumed that, since I was feeling bad, my mom had stayed the rest of the night with me. That cold, cloudy morning, we were more concerned about what had happened the night before. We couldn't enjoy our escape. My parents told us not to go far from the cabin and my brothers only talked about what could have been and how the most appropriate plan would be to defend ourselves if someone attacked us in a place like that. I saw them almost amused with the plans, as if they were living their own horror movie. We were already inside and they were still talking in the living room. Then, from my room, I heard them even more startled. I went out to listen carefully to what they were saying and I saw them glued to the window. "There's something there behind those trees, look," they said. I approached them to tell them to please not scare me with that, but I could see a huge black figure, about 1.90 meters tall, moving from one tree to another. It wasn't much more than 40 meters from our cabin. We told my dad what was there, but asked him not to go out and check. He suggested that we go in the truck to town to look for the man from the cabin, but the truth is that we preferred not to take that road at that time, since it was too lonely. One of my brothers offered to run down the path that led to the town more directly, but obviously that wasn't a good idea either. So only my dad went out and approached the place they had indicated to us, where there was more signal, and there he waited until he sent a message. It took about 20 minutes to return while the message went out and the man responded that he was going there. By that time, we realized that the entire afternoon had already passed us by. It was about to get dark again. Outside the cabin, everything seemed to have a blue filter and the fog was so thick it was almost like a cloud. The landscape was really very beautiful and, for a moment, knowing that the man was going to arrive at any moment, I felt that we were beginning to relax. He told us that maybe it was just someone who was passing by on the sidewalk and had looked at us here all scared. The others agreed, except my mother, who insisted that there was something strange. "Yesterday when I went to check on you at night," she said, "I clearly saw that there was someone standing outside your window. I didn't want to scare you, but that's why I stayed there with you." The next hour was spent by my mom and dad arguing in the room about why she hadn't told him anything. But my mother also had reasons for not having done it. We heard footsteps on the wood outside and we approached the door thinking that the man had already arrived, but we didn't see anyone. Before we could go to tell my parents, we heard laughter in the distance, but somehow also very close. We all heard it. My dad ran out of the room and then we heard something else. Something was moving in my brother's room, so strong that some things hanging on the wall moved. They ran to see who was there, but there was no one in the room and the wall moved again. We ran out to the car and just when my father was going to return for my mother's bag and her wallet, the man arrived with a pickup truck and some boys. My dad signaled to them and told them there was someone in there. Two of them ran out to check the cabin corner by corner. Eventually they managed to find something, a kind of shelter built into the interior walls with clothing and food scraps. Someone had cut a hole in one of the corners of the roof and had been living in this cabin when there were no guests, returning to the wall when someone came to spend the weekend. The most horrible thing was that, through this wall, I could reach the bathroom, the shower, and although the owner assured us that there was no way I could have seen inside, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had felt. As if he were scratching that wall a few inches from me. In the living room and in my brother's room, where we heard him for the last time, there were cracks that allowed him to observe us. We all decided not to make it public, because we knew that the cabin was the man's only way to support himself financially, and he assured us that he didn't know anything and that he was going to solve it. But, as far as we knew, they never found the person hiding there. By the time they finished checking everything, it was almost 5 in the morning, and although the man invited us to stay, we decided to return home. 2 years later, when we were able to have vacations again, we preferred to return to the beach. I don't know what you, community, will think, but I am going to share with you the most terrifying experience I have ever lived, and it is the most vivid memory I have to this day. I have always liked to have unusual dates, and what I am going to tell you about happened when I was just starting out with a girl who is my wife today. I had scout friends who constantly invited me to their walks, but I never accepted. However, when they told me about a very beautiful waterfall that formed not far from the city during the rainy season, it interested me. They said you had to walk about 10 kilometers to get there, and although 10 kilometers in nowhere seemed like a lot, it was a perfect place and worth it. I thought it was the right adventure to spend a whole day with my girlfriend. When I proposed it to her, she happily accepted and prepared herself, even with the correct footwear for it. I didn't have the right footwear, but at the time I didn't care and I remembered the instructions along the way well. We left the car in the same place as them, at a break next to the road, and I started looking around for the train track we had to follow. There was no problem because, if I followed the path, I wouldn't get lost. The only detail is that, as they said, we had to cross a bridge where there was no space other than the train. Although the truth is, on that route it was already strange when trains passed by. Just as they had described to me, not far from the road was the tunnel. You could see a tunnel that crossed a hill about 200 meters long. Although it was a bit scary, the beginning of our walk with a tunnel was already exciting. We were doing something we had never experienced before. We crossed the tunnel and walked for no more than 20 minutes on the train tracks, when all the sounds of the road and any sign of civilization had already been left far behind. I don't know what I was talking to my girlfriend, probably trying to impress her, when she asked me to shut up and pay attention to what was in front of her. In the distance, about 400 meters, you could already see the bridge. But before that, halfway across the bridge, two black figures could be seen crouching on both sides of the road, facing each other. At first we didn't know what they were. They looked like a couple of animals. The truth is, we couldn't find a way for them, but we continued walking towards their direction. We hadn't advanced 5 steps before we were able to see how they were incorporated. There were 2 people, 2 men dressed in black, with long coats reaching to their knees. Without saying anything, they turned to us and began walking. My girlfriend told me to come back. I told her no, that we couldn't cancel everything because of some crazy people on the train track, but she insisted. She felt bad and she had a bad feeling. While we were arguing, the guys were already about 100 meters away from us, walking slowly but steadily. Then I saw that one of them was carrying something long that was shining. I was almost sure it was a machete. Seeing that, I listened to my girlfriend and, at that moment, we started walking back, quickening our pace but not running, because they were walking at the same speed as us. We felt that if we ran, they would too, and I wasn't sure we could keep up until we reached the car. He didn't say anything to them, but he kept turning around. I wanted them to know that we were ready, that they weren't going to take us by surprise. I found a thin branch but strong and long enough to defend ourselves if necessary and picked it up. I told my girlfriend that, no matter what happened, if they caught up with us, she would run until she reached the road without turning back. They were already about 50 meters away from us when I looked back again. One of them left the road and got lost in the bushes that went up the hill on one side of the other side of the road. A few meters away there was a stream and then also a hill. We were in a canyon. There was no one who could help us or listen to us if something happened at that time. We quickened our pace until we were almost jogging. In the distance we finally saw the hill and the tunnel. If we managed to get there, we would be very close to the car and the road. We were a few steps from the tunnel when we started running. We did it because I saw that, in fact, the guy who was still on the road was also running after us. But when they reached the tunnel, he did not enter. We stopped more or less in the middle of the tunnel, where the darkness made it difficult for him to see us, and we noticed that he was no longer on the road at the entrance to the tunnel. It seemed like they had left us alone, or at least that's what I wanted to think at the time. My girlfriend stopped right in the middle and kept telling me that she didn't want to leave, she didn't want to move forward. Even though we literally saw the light at the end of the tunnel and there we would be very close to the car, she had a kind of panic attack and I didn't know what to do or how to help her. She asked me to come back. I felt like they were waiting for us, but in the end I accepted and we returned very slowly to the end of the tunnel where, a moment ago, one of these guys saw us. We went out and there was no one there. We looked around at the bushes and saw nothing. I told him we should go towards the stream, on the opposite side of where they had disappeared. We did so and it took us almost 40 minutes to cross it and climb the hill, find a path and, finally, be able to return to the road. We had circled so far that we ended up so far away that we then had to walk on the road for about a kilometer to get to the car. Not a single car passed as we walked down the road, but still, when we ran to the car and started it, we started laughing. It was surreal what had just happened to us, and we even felt bad at that moment, making fun of ourselves for having been scared, probably for no reason. We advanced a little along the road to return to the entrance of the path that led to the train track, and there we could see the entrance to the tunnel. When we did, we saw the two figures in black again, on both sides of the road, but among the bushes. They were waiting for us. My girlfriend said, "They're still waiting for us." We started beeping at them for some reason. Perhaps, emboldened by already being in the car about to take the road to return, when they saw us, they started running towards us as if desperate. I was barely able to turn around on the narrow path to get back on the road, when they were already a few steps away from us. They looked very strange. They were too pale, almost as if they weren't from there. A friend lived half an hour away, and I spoke to him and asked him to come to her house so that my girlfriend could calm down, because she had started to feel very bad because of fear. We told my friend what had happened to us. His parents were also there, and his mother was preparing us tea for the scare when her father began to scold him for having gone there before and us for having also gone there later. It turns out that it was well known, and we later verified by telling other acquaintances about this experience, that area is very dangerous. Walking around is not recommended. It has always been known for its strong magnetic charge, the subject of studies, but in recent years, very strange people, even satanic, had begun to frequent it. Knowing this, I remembered all the strange drawings that I saw in the tunnel and that at that moment I ignored, thinking that they were simple graffiti or lazy jokes. At one point, I was grateful that I saved us from those two guys. My girlfriend asked if the other guy in a costume who hid before them in the bushes was part of all this. I didn't know what to say to him, but it was clear that we both had a different experience than what we expected. Hello to all those who make it possible and listen to stories of the night. I'm going to tell you about the most bizarre and terrifying experience that I have ever had to live through, which happened to us just when my parents had bought a house that they worked hard for years. A house far from the city center, in a much quieter area. A subdivision that, in fact, had barely been built and whose houses were beginning to be occupied. It was middle class but very safe. Our house was in a private complex of about 30 homes, and we had security guards. More than half of the houses were still empty when we moved. Weeks before the move, I had met a boy on Facebook in an anime group. Although we had no friends in common, we soon began to get along very well. He didn't live nearby, but at the other end of the city. He eventually got up the courage to ask me out to finally meet in person. Since I didn't want to go downtown, I told him that if he came to my house, he would accept. I told him about a shopping center not far from where he had moved me. Although it only had a few stores open, it already had a movie theater and places to eat. He agreed to see us there the following Saturday. It fit me perfectly. I would take advantage of the fact that my dad was working and my mom would go to a birthday party with my little sister near the other house where we lived. It was 6 o'clock when I left home. The mall was about a 20-minute walk away, so I decided to walk. But just as I was leaving, a figure caught my eye behind a curtain in the house across the street. No doubt someone was spying on us from there. I sent a message to my mother, who had the phone number at the guardhouse, so she could report it. According to me, that house was still empty and didn't give me any confidence. I continued walking to my destination. I liked the neighborhood a lot, but I liked it even more back then, calm until I couldn't take it anymore. That's how I arrived at the shopping center, just like the neighborhoods around it, half empty, with long, lonely corridors that seemed more like something out of a zombie movie than a real shopping center. Then I noticed someone following me. At first I was scared, but I calmed down when I saw that it was a lady. She was a lady with very straight black hair, wearing extremely thin clothes but very tall, much taller than me, like her at 1.80 meters. I started to feel strange when I noticed that she was walking at the same speed as me, a few meters behind. So, when I got to the first open store in that aisle, I stopped for her to pass me, but she stopped too. While I was looking at the store, she was looking at an empty store. I started walking again and reached the fountain in the center of the square, where I would wait for Jorge, the boy. Although he had arrived a little earlier than agreed, I texted him to tell him to hurry because there was a strange lady following me closely and the mall was much lonelier than I had thought. He told me that if she wanted, she would wait for him on the second floor, near the parking lot exit, and that he would arrive soon. But the truth is, I was more afraid of going up to that much more lonely area. At least where I was there were several open stores around. I had the reflexes to look in the window of a store in front of me and I could see that the lady, with her unmistakable long hair, was right above me, on the floor above, leaning out and looking at me. I made no move. I wanted to pretend that she hadn't noticed it. I only sent a new message to Jorge, as discreetly as possible, saying that he was already feeling better and that I was going to go up and wait for him in the parking lot. I was heading towards the stairs, but at the last moment I ran to the main entrance, where luckily there was a free taxi that I got into and asked it to take me home. When I arrived at the gate, the guard greeted me and told me that he had seen the person he had mentioned to my mother. He said that he had run out a little after me, when he was just going to check the house. He was a man of about 50 years old, about 1.80 meters tall and very thin, who wore a long wig and black women's clothing. She was the lady who had followed me in the mall. My only reaction was to go to Facebook at that moment, and Jorge's profile had already disappeared. Although people already live in that house across the street, when I go out and the light is off and the window is open, I always have the same terrifying memory. If the street is alone, I feel like I'm going to see him standing at that window again.